The other question that's raised is, was Muhammad illiterate? In Surah 7, 157 and 158, he's called the Ummi prophet. To Muslims, Ummi means that he could not read or write. Orientalists, that is scholars who study the Middle East, think that the word Ummi comes from the word Ummah, or nation, and that means he was Gentile or a non-Jewish prophet. Others say that it means that he was uninstructed in the Scriptures, or not of those who read the Scriptures, since the Arabs did not have a scripture of their own. The question is still open as to whether Muhammad could actually read or write, but most people from the West think that he had a basic ability to read and write. Another question, is Islam the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham regarding Ishmael in Genesis chapter 16, verses 11 and 12, also in chapter 17, verse 20 and 21, verses 12 and 13? That is, where God promised to raise up seed for Abraham and make him a great nation. Now, the Muslims will say that Ishmael is the one who fulfills that promise. Christians, in answer to the Muslim teaching, would say emphatically no. We would point them to Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 through 31, where after Abraham bore a child or fathered a child with Hagar, that child Ishmael was not called the son of promise. In fact, Paul very clearly contrasts Isaac with Ishmael, and he says that it is in Abraham's seed, that is Isaac, that the promise is given. So for the Christian, Isaac is definitely the child of promise. The next area that we want to take a look at is the founding of the Muslim community, or as they call it, the Ummah, under Muhammad. As we mentioned, the pivotal event of Islamic history is the immigration from Mecca to Medina in 622 A.D. This is called the Hijra, or the Hijra, as some people say. When Meccans heard of Muhammad's pact with Yathrib, they determined to exterminate Islam. Muslims at that time secretly began to emigrate to Yathrib, Medina of today, and that, in their mind, marks the beginning of the Ummah, or the first community in history to live in submission to the law of God, or Sharia. Because Muhammad was successful in negotiating a pact between the feuding tribes of Yathrib, some of which were Jewish and some of which were Arab, he gained great prominence as a leader, and they respected him and actually promoted him in their hierarchy. From this secure base, Muhammad led his followers to attack and plunder Meccan caravans, which hurt their business. There were several key skirmishes that the Muslims fought with the people of Mecca. In 624, they fought the skirmish at Badr, in which the Muslims were victorious. In 625, they fought at Uhud, and the Meccans at that point prevailed. However, for some reason, they withdrew from the battlefield, and so the Muslims regarded that as a basic victory. And then finally, in 627, there was a skirmish at Khaybar in which the Muslims prevailed. During this last skirmish, the Jewish tribes of Medina broke their pact with the Muslims, and they aided the Meccans. And at that point, they were crushed. And from that point on, hostility began to grow between Muhammad and the people of the book, that is, the Jewish people. In 628, Muhammad negotiated the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with the people of Mecca, and Muslims were permitted to make the annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba. In 629, they returned to the Kaaba, which was still under pagan control, with many different followers. In 630, however, the Meccans broke the treaty, and so Muhammad came with 10,000 of his men. The Meccans capitulated, and at that point, Muhammad came in and purged the Kaaba of all of its idols. From the power base that he then got in Mecca, he subdued all the Arab tribes one by one until the entire Arabian Peninsula fell under the sway of Islam. In 631, Muhammad made his last pilgrimage from Medina to Mecca, and in 632 he died after a very short illness at about the age of 62. Although he lived a relatively short life, one would have to ask, what was the nature of Muhammad's life? What were some of his major accomplishments? Well, the first thing we can say is that Muhammad united the factious Arab tribes on the basis of a radically new social arrangement, religious faith. He gave the Arabs a scripture in their own language. He rooted out idolatry from the Arab peoples and established the worship of one God, Allah. He founded the Islamic Ummah based on religious law, the Sharia. Now, these are very notable accomplishments for any man. After Muhammad passed away, there was a question as to who should be his successor, or Khalifa, in leading the Muslims. There were a couple of contending views that came up among his followers. The first view was that whoever followed Muhammad in the leadership of Islam should be a descendant of the Prophet. Now, you remember, all of Muhammad's sons died, and so therefore he did not leave any direct male descendants. The second view was that he should be elected from the community of believers. It was the second opinion that prevailed, and Abu Bakr, who was one of Muhammad's closest companions, was elected. Ali, who was his son-in-law, the husband of his daughter Fatima, was rejected as caliph. Subsequently, there were 4 caliphs that were regarded as rightly guided by the Muslim community. That is, they were the ones who measured up to the spiritual model. The first was Abu Bakr, who reigned from 632 to 634. Abu Bakr was a Hashemite, that is, he was a member of the same tribe as Muhammad, and he was the father of Muhammad's wife Aisha. Umar was the second caliph, another companion of Muhammad. He reigned to 644. Again, he was a Hashemite. He was a father of Muhammad's third wife, Hafsa. The third was Uthman, who reigned from 644 to 656 from the Umayyad tribe. He was the husband of Muhammad's daughter, and he put his clansmen into key posts, which created a lot of resentment of the non-Qurayshi Muslims. And then finally, Ali was caliph. He finally was elected between 656 and 661. He was also a Hashemite. He was a cousin of Muhammad and his son-in-law, as we mentioned, the husband of Fatima. Now, a conflict arose over the caliphate because Uthman was assassinated, and after he was assassinated, Ali was elected as caliph. Muawiyah, the Umayyad governor of Syria, accused Ali of the assassination. War broke out between Muawiyah and Ali was killed. Later, his 2 sons, Hassan and Hussein, also went into conflict against Muawiyah, and they were also killed, and their bodies were terribly mutilated. As a result, a tremendous conflict occurred between the 2 different groups, and one group split off. In fact, this conflict is regarded as the origin of Shiite Islam, because the Shiites call themselves the members of the party of Ali. That is the origin of the term Shiite, Shia Ali. Muawiyah, however, became the caliph, and he founded the Umayyad dynasty. Now, there are a number of caliphates that we should regard as predominant or principal. The history of the caliphate is very complex, and so we will mention only the most important ones. First of all, the Umayyad Caliphate, which began with Muawiyah from about 661 to about 750. The Umayyads had their capital at Damascus in Syria, and it was under them that Islam probably underwent its greatest expansion. There was the Abbasid Caliphate, which was a Hashemite, and that existed from about 750 to 1258. Its capital was at Baghdad in Iraq. The power of the caliphs declined during their reign, and the last one of them was killed by the grandson of Genghis Khan. The last caliphate was the Ottoman or Turkish Caliphate, which existed between 1299 and 1924. It had its capital at Istanbul, and it was finally abolished after the close of World War I by Ataturk in 1924. From the 7th through the 14th century, as we mentioned, Islam underwent its greatest geographic expansion. The initial period of expansion occurred from about 632 to 750, which was at the time of the end of the Umayyad Caliphate. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, launched a period of conquests in which he conquered Persia, defeated the Byzantine army in Syria. Now, the Byzantine and the Persian empires had weakened each other by incessant warfare. Eventually, all of Mesopotamia fell under Muslim control in 641, and they continued their eastern penetration as well under the Caliphate of Umar. In 642, Alexandria in Egypt fell to the Muslims, who continued westward expansion. That was also under the Caliphate of Umar. The Umayyads continued the conquest mainly in the west from the 7th through the 8th centuries. In 670, present-day Tunisia was invaded, and they established the city of Qairan. In 699, Morocco fell to Islam, and the Muslims crossed the Straits of Gibraltar. In 711, Spain was conquered and became a key center of Muslim civilization for 8 centuries. In 717, the Muslims crossed the Pyrenees and invaded France, but in 732, they were turned back at the Battle of Tours or Poitiers in France by Charles Martel, which marked the limits of Muslim expansion in Western Europe. In the 11th through the 16th century, we also saw expansion of Islam, but primarily under non-Arab leaders. In 1086, the Almoravids, or Tuareg Berbers, took control of Morocco and Spain, and they overthrew the empire of Ghana. They then began the Islamization of Africa south of the Sahara. The Seljuks, or the Turks, converted to Islam themselves, and they defeated the Byzantines in Anatolia, or what is today eastern Turkey. In the 1200s, the Mongols attacked the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and they virtually pulverized the Muslims. But they eventually adopted Islam themselves by the end of the 12th century, around 1295. Later we saw the Ottomans conquer and absorb the Seljuks and began their expansion, most notably into the Eastern Empire, which included Yugoslavia and Albania. In 1453, Constantinople fell and became Istanbul, and that marked the end of the Byzantine Empire. In 1529, the Ottoman Turks reached the gates of Vienna, and the empire eventually extended from Algeria through Cyprus to Hungary. And of course, that is the reason today that there's much conflict in the Balkans, because of the mixed religions and cultures that we see in Eastern Europe. Now, many people have their ideas about how Islam was spread. Many people say, for example, Islam was spread by the sword. That is, people were given the chance to confess Islam or die. In general, people were forced to adopt Islam at sword point only on the Arabian Peninsula. The use of military power to establish political control over a territory, followed by gradual Islamization through preaching, was far more common. So you can say that political control led to religious conversion. In some cases, the Christian populations actually helped Muslims gain control. That was particularly the case in Syria and Egypt, because they were more tolerant than the oppressive Byzantines, who persecuted other Christians. They also extended Islam by political alliances and intermarriage with the daughters of local chieftains. Particularly, this was the case in North Africa. And then by trade, especially to the south of the Sahara, the traders would spread the religion of Islam. And then in modern times, we see especially Islam being extended by immigration, especially in the West.